This is one example that I show my students. I thought you might be interested to see. This is a process, it doesn't particularly matter what it is, from a medchem paper. So it's an amine and acid in an amide coupling reaction using coupling reagents HABT and ethyl diazocarboxylate. They use DMF solvent, and there's a base in their triethylamine. And these are the amounts of the reagents and solvents that are used. And you can see they're relatively small, and we produce 156 milligrams of product. Now, if we took that process and scaled it up directly to make a tonne, what are the consequences? So the scaling factor here is rather large, and of course I'm showing you why you wouldn't do this. Oops. If we scale it directly, these are the volumes of the materials that we require. So 129 mgs goes to 827 kilos, and so on and so forth. So the total volume in the process is now 20,000 litres, and we're making 1 tonne, so that means we've got a 5% weight to volume process. Now, I told you a minute ago, 5% was a good target. It's within our range of 5 to 25%. So you'd say, well, what's the problem? Well, of course, that doesn't consider the workup. So we have to take this product and we have to separate the product and wash things out. So in the workup, we use some ethyl acetate, and we use a water wash with 3 6.8 ml volumes. And the total of that's 20.5 mils. Now, if we scale that up, now we need 73,000 litres of ethyl acetate and 3 times 43,000 litres of water. And now it's 116,000 litres. Our productivity's dropped to 0.86%. So you think, well, that's pretty bad. You know, we need to do something about that. But that's not the end of the story, because in the medchem paper, they do what most chemists would do. They purify it using chromatography. So here we've got sodium sulfate to dry it, and then we use some silica, and then ethyl acetate and dichloromethane, and they use about 1 litre of each solvent. I have guessed, actually, because they don't normally report how much solvent they use, but that would be a typical volume. And of course, if you scale this now, we need 320,000 kilos of silica, 6 million litres of solvent, or of ethyl acetate, and 6 million litres of dichloromethane. And of course, the total volume of the process is now 12 million litres to make 1 tonne of material. So the productivity is 0.0078%. So that obviously is ridiculous. You wouldn't do it, and that says why you need to develop this process. And it becomes fairly obvious where we need to develop it. It's not the reaction stage which is the problem, it's this stage here. So we would reduce the amount of washing, water, and that would help improve the process, and we get rid of the chromatography. And then we'd have a process that might be operable in principle. What about the reaction time? I mentioned it's not the reaction itself that's important, it's often the workup stage and the amount of time that that can take. So here's the same process, and what I've done is taken all of the operations in that process, adding the materials together, stirring, separating the phases and so on, and I've taken the amount of time for each of those. So it takes 3 minutes to add the reagents together. The reaction is actually 3 hours, 180 minutes. And then we add, it takes about 3, 10 minutes, 1 minute for each of these different operations here. And if we total all of those up, we end up taking about 4 hours, 360 minutes to do the whole thing. If we scale that up, now it takes much longer to add materials together into a large vessel. So, whereas it was taking 3 minutes, it now takes 60 minutes or 120 minutes to add those materials together. The reaction time is exactly the same because the kinetics are the same. The charging the liquids takes much longer. Heating the reactor now takes 4 hours. Distilling the solvent takes 480 minutes, and so on and so forth. And one that takes a long time that's not recognised here is actually washing out the reactor for the next batch and preparing it. And all of those, of course, add up to the cycle time, which is now 2,600 minutes or 44 hours to do that same operation. So if we scale that directly and made that, use the laboratory process to make the tonne, it would take 45 years in those round bottom flasks to be able to do it, using that cycle time there. And of course that's ridiculous, and of course that explains why we do things at larger scale. So if we did the same process to make that tonne of material takes 260 hours or 5 weeks of operation, which of course is manageable. So those are, illustrations of why you need to develop a process. And if we're looking at that, we'd say immediately, well, the things that take a long time are the distillation, the charging solvents, the washing and so on. And those would be areas where we would develop that process and try to reduce the amount of time that it takes.